I'm an urban planner and a land use and zoning consultant. I'm from Northeast Queens. You know, I don't know how many of you know Eastern Queens, but we're kind of your sibling, right? We're the other part of the city that's basically mostly suburban, right? So we are very much on the same page, our communities. As, by the way, as are some denser areas of Queens and southern and central Brooklyn and the north and east Bronx. All of us are very much on the same page about a lot of issues. And by the way, I'm an environmentalist, and I think this is nuts, what he brought up. And the problem is, when policies are dictated from people who don't live in your community, this is what you end up with, and this is what we are facing with the City of Yes. So, this is titled, How These Two Packages, the economic piece of this, which is going through the City Council right now. They are going to vote on this in the next few weeks. And the housing piece, which the community boards are hearing right now. In fact, Community Board 1 heard it last night, as did Board 2, I believe. So, let me preface this briefly by why we are where we are, okay? Does anybody remember 20 years ago, 25 years ago, when our communities in Staten Island, in Queens, we got really upset with all the development that was going on that didn't make any sense. And we actually worked with our elected officials. And we actually got some response, right? So Staten Island basically was turned into one big lower growth management zone for the whole island. You got a big rezoning. And in Westerleigh itself, and this is really important, Westerleigh, you got a big downzoning, right? This is actually an article from almost exactly 16 years ago. Downzoning gets final okay in Staten Island's Westerleigh neighborhood. I'm going to read this for people who can't see it in the back. The City Council has given approval needed to downzone more than 75 blocks in Staten Island's Westerleigh neighborhood. The new rules, which take effect immediately, cover a little over 1,400 lots and represent the largest switch from two-family detached housing to single-family housing in the borough. As far, and this is heads up to Mike, his quote, as far as the Westerleigh Improvement Society is concerned, it's the end of a long road, and we are thrilled that it happened. Mike Morrell, president of the Civic Association, said of yesterday's unanimous 51-0 vote at the council. The city wasn't always keen on the downzoning. In 2006, after the Westerleigh Improvement Society had done much of the legwork on its rezoning application, city planning said it would not support the request. At the time, city planning chairwoman Amanda Burton said that the existing zoning in Westerleigh adequately protected the area from builder teardowns, but the demolition of two high-profile older homes on Jewett Avenue prompted renewed calls for the downzoning. When city planning agreed a year later to move the application forward, there was talk that it was tied to a compromise over upzoning parts of St. George. McMahon, and that refers to your current DA, who was the councilperson at the time, said he did tell city planning he wouldn't consider St. George for zoning changes unless the city addressed the downzoning application for Westerleigh. But he also insisted there was no quid pro quo. Westerleigh is a beautiful historic neighborhood, and we're at risk of losing that without this rezoning. I'm pleased that the city finally heard the message from the community and my colleagues in government that we needed to protect the character of our neighborhood, he said. Wow. Well, you know what? We did this all over Queens, okay? I actually did most of the rezonings in Queens. I wrote the R2A anti-McMansion zone, because we have that problem in Queens. And we zoned most of Eastern Queens R2A, and we did all kinds of zoning there. And other parts of the city did the same thing, as did Staten Island. All of that ended in 2013. Why did that happen? Change of administration. because every administration does different things. So we got a new mayor. He immediately said, we're never going to do this again. 8 years he was in office, he kept his word. However, and I have not great feelings about this very tall man. Anybody taller than me is tall. It's probably the nicest thing I can say about him. But he didn't attack our communities. He just kind of neglected us, which is okay. Unfortunately, the current mayor and this current administration and his allies are following a playbook that has taken place over the last few years. So let me give you this very briefly. In 2020, we had a speaker named Corey Johnson. Name ring a bell?
Yeah.
At the end of 2020, I happened to turn on the old television set and saw him having a press conference. And he said, I'm going to change land use in the city forever. And I have come up with a plan. It's called Planning Together. And I said, okay, let me see what this is all about. And I looked through it. And the first thing it does in the document, it says, elimination of single-family zoning across the city of New York. The second thing it says is, every community board in New York City must upzone every decade in perpetuity. And if the community boards and the council members can't agree on which areas they want to upzone, there will be a new city planning above the current city planning, with a Wizard of Oz-like character, who will then designate areas to increase density. So myself and a civic leader in Southeast Queens, a woman named Renee Hill, fabulous person, we created a coalition, and for 6 weeks we went from community board to community board. We reached out to all the civics all over the city, and long story short, there was a single public hearing, everybody screamed, and Corey Johnson dropped it. Why did he introduce it in the first place? Well, he was running for control. And he was using it as a political platform to run for control, which he lost. We now have a guy named, I believe, Brad Lander. And he now has his own public relations firm, Kojo Public Relations. Follow that to the next point. We lost a governor, Cuomo, that guy, right. He was replaced by a woman named Kathy Hochul. All right. So, the first State of the State address she made at the beginning of January 2022, and again, I'm one of the 100 people not in government who watches these things because I'm a nerd. Okay, let's just say it. She said one sentence that caught my attention. And the sentence was, we're going to get rid of outdated zoning laws that are holding back housing supply. I said, okay, let me see what the State of the State address says. First thing on the list, eliminate single-family zoning in the entire state of New York. Force every municipality in the state of New York to create accessory dwelling units. We're going to talk about that tonight. Accessory dwelling units. Take away home rule. Home rule is actually enshrined in the state constitution. We are one of the few states where our local governments have equal power to the state government. So the state cannot impose land use decisions on our communities. So she was literally violating the state constitution by doing this. She also wanted to do transit-oriented development, TODs. We're also going to talk about that tonight. And she wanted to give blanket amnesty to all illegal conversions in the city of New York. Okay, so I organized a group called Save One Family New York. And in 2 weeks, I cold called. I knew a lot of the civics in the city, but I started getting in touch and cold calling people in Nassau, Suffolk, Westchester, Hudson Valley, Rochester, Buffalo, you name it, everywhere across the state. In a very short period of time, she removed everything from the budget. She had put it all into the budget bill to try to get it passed during the budget. Stuffed it in there. She took everything out except for the blanket amnesty for illegal conversions, which had to be taken out by the legislature. Okay. We told everybody, if she gets reelected, this is going to come back. She got reelected, and last year, you might remember, the housing compact. Does anybody remember that? It was all over the news. It was the same thing as the year before, all the things I just said, and forcing every community to increase housing supply every year in perpetuity. And if you don't do it, then the state's going to come in and start designating places to allow high-density development. So we put the band back together. We did the same thing. Do you remember last year the budget was like 6 weeks late?
Yeah.
Yeah, that was because we stopped it from happening. Because again, she put it in the budget, and the legislature, believe it or not, told her, we're not going to sign off on this budget if this stuff is in here. It was that and bail reform. Those were the two issues. She finally dropped it. However, she brought it back again this year, and then the mayor brought forward the City of Yes. So that's where we are today. We are in the fight of our lifetime. It's the only thing I can describe. And I've been doing this for 30 years. I've never seen anything like this, and we have an enormous problem on our hands. Now, luckily with the budget, we did get the blanket amnesty for illegal conversions out for a third year in a row. Now it's a pilot program. It's not in Staten Island. It's only in one community board in Queens, that would be Sunnyside and Long Island City, to which I say enjoy. A few boards in the Bronx and a few boards in Brooklyn. And half of Manhattan, which has no basement or cellar apartments. So again, who's driving these policies? It is not our communities that are driving these policies. It is people in Manhattan. It is people who are allied with them in other locations who are driving this terrible nuclear bomb type legislation, okay? So let's talk about the City of Yes. I want you to look at this picture. This is a zoning map of New York City from 1989. This is on the official city planning website from about 7 months ago. And you'll notice they put this 1989, they're trying to be Taylor Swift, you know, it's pretty stupid. But that just tells you the mentality of the people who are staffing our agencies right now, because most of them are in their 20s. And that is not an ageist thing, it's an inexperience thing, okay? This is the quote that was on that page. We've got bad blood with Robert Moses, and we've made a lot of progress to improve New York City zoning, but we're not out of the woods yet. That's why we're chasing our wildest dreams in City of Yes to shake exclusionary zoning off and say once and for all, welcome to New York. Okay, so let's talk a minute about Robert Moses. Okay, this is Robert Moses. Very controversial human being, did a lot of bad stuff, did some stuff that wasn't as bad. But what I say to people is, whatever the case, we would not be here without him. Your communities, many of them wouldn't exist without them. And that is his legacy today, right? The Staten Island Expressway, the Cross Island by where I live, all of these places would not be able to have been gotten to without the transportation network that he designed, for example. Okay, again, not the greatest guy in the world. Here's a couple of quotes from him. Your principal error is this, to imagine that the people's views are of any importance at all. We must advance their fortunes without having any respect for their opinions. You can draw any kind of picture you want on a clean slate and indulge your every whim in the wilderness and laying out in New Delhi, Canberra, or Brasilia, which, by the way, were all being built from scratch, these capitals in these other countries. But when you operate in an overbuilt metropolis, you have to hack your way with a meat axe. And finally, if you elect a matinee idol mayor, you're going to have a musical comedy administration. And my comments are, Philosophy of the Adams Administration, Philosophy of the Adams Administration, and Accurate Description of the Adams Administration. Let's talk about the person who stopped him. And he was stopped a number of times. Actually, one of the greatest battles that's never talked about, not this one, is Eleanor Roosevelt. You guys know where the Battery is, Battery Park? Do you know that Robert Moses, during World War II, wanted to build a bridge between Battery Park and Red Hook? And he wanted to demolish Battery Park to build that, including what's known as, I believe it's Castle Williams. Castle Clinton, I'm sorry, Castle Clinton, correct. And there was a 6-year battle that went on between Fiorello LaGuardia, who was the mayor at the time, and Robert Moses. And Eleanor Roosevelt stepped in, which is incredible. And she said, oh, that's a national monument. And that ended it. And that's why we have the Brooklyn Battery Tunnel, instead of demolishing the whole southern end of Manhattan. Okay, so this woman was a woman named Jane Jacobs. Jane Jacobs was an urbanist. Let's call her an urbanist. She had a great quote. Cities grow up. They just happen, bit by bit. Hand the city to the planners, and they'll make it a desert. Hand it to the people, and they'll make it habitable. What did she do? She stopped Robert Moses from building an expressway that was going to connect the Holland Tunnel with the Manhattan Bridge. And it was going to demolish all of Tribeca and Soho and part of the Village to do that. And that was kind of the beginning of the preservation movement, which also became the beginning of rezoning communities to protect them. All part of the same thing, okay? So just giving you a little bit of that background, this editorial came out 1 month ago from the Daily News. Who here has a subscription to the Daily News? Thank you. Good. This is their editorial. However, what should be dismissed offhand is anything that too heavily emphasizes, quote, neighborhood character, property values, or fretting over increased density. These tedious arguments, are missing the point, which is that a lack of housing stock threatens affordability and quality of life in all of New York, and there's no way to dodge this by holding firm against development. The bucolic character of any particular neighborhood is going to matter little as the current residents are priced out. For those who desperately want to live in a suburb, we'll remind you that there are several in the immediate vicinity of the 5 boroughs. This is New York City. Yes. Yes, Daddy.
Yes.
Right. I mean, very top-heavy on that one, right? So, given the rhetoric from that particular editorial, and by the way, the New York Times, the New York Post, all of the main media, I'm not talking about your community papers, but the main media all think that this is the best idea they've ever heard, to densify our low-density communities. In fact, according to the mayor, we are the cause of the housing crisis. Our communities are the cause of the housing crisis, and the contextual zonings that were done are the cause of the housing crisis. All of this has been said publicly by the mayor and the Department of City Planning. This slide that you're seeing here is from the Department of City Planning during the hearing at the City Council, which was about 2 months ago. Dan Garodnick, who used to be a councilperson from the east side of Manhattan, he's the chair, and he showed this slide and said, look at how many meetings we had with community boards. This was for the economic piece of this plan, the commercial piece of this plan. We had 175 meetings with community boards. No one's done more outreach on a plan than we have. I want to give you the reality. There are 59 community boards in the city of New York. That is 3 meetings per board. 3. For the most complicated rezoning proposal in the history of New York City, it's 1,127 pages long. That's for the economic piece. The housing piece is 1,386 pages long. How many of you have read that? I've read both front to back multiple times, which is part of the reason I'm standing here tonight. They also mentioned that 4 or 5 borough presidents recommended to approve it with conditions. Yours was the only one that did not vote to approve this, okay? Yes, and you feel free to. What they left out was that 2/3 of the community boards voted no. They voted no, they voted hell no. And they left that out of the discussion entirely and only pretended that the 21 boards that conditionally voted yes, in other words, they said yes, but they only looked at those 21, and of those, maybe half of those, they threw away. So they only took advice from a few of them. So basically, at the end of the day, about 85% of the boards ultimately voted no. And yet, the Department of City Planning has continued pushing this agenda. So, let's talk about a few pieces of the economic and how it merges with the housing. Because I think all of this is going to make you, as I said, that was just the warm-up act. These are the slides that they showed to the community board. They are simple, they're fuzzy, they're one sentence long, they're written as if you're a second grader. Corner stores create a process to allow for small new bodegas and other locally serving storefronts in residential areas. Do you know what it says in that 1,127-page document? It says, allow commercial, office, retail, or storefront on any property within 100 feet of a corner on any residential block anywhere in the city of New York with the City Planning Commission's authorization. Okay? The slide that they showed to the City Council actually was closer to the truth. So, in other words, when City Planning came out and gave their presentations to Community Board 1, like last night, they gave a half-hour, 45-minute presentation with a one-sentence explanation for 18 proposals for the economic piece and 15 for the residential, the housing piece. And then said, here's a checklist. I want you to check off the ones that you say yes, no, or modify it if you want. That's the public input from you guys. That's all they did. With the City Council, they actually gave some information. But even here, this gives the City Planning Commission sole authority to determine whether your house on your corner can be developed into a commercial property. Okay? No environmental review. No environmental review. And here it says community board approval, but at the hearing it said he said advisory only. After actually Kamillah Hanks grilled him on that point, first saying corner stores, we don't want that in Staten Island. Fair enough. And B, that if the community board votes no, are you going to vote no? And after about 5 minutes he said, well, they're advisory only. So the point is, they want to change the law to give them sole authority. Now, what's the reason? Well, their stated reason is because 265,000 New Yorkers currently live in areas where a new corner store could not be located within a quarter mile of their homes. Now that sounds like a lot of people, but 265,000 people is about 3% of the population. And where is it? Staten Island, Eastern Queens, the North Bronx, Southern Brooklyn. Places that don't want a corner store a quarter of a mile, within a quarter of a mile of their home, right? This map shows you Jamaica Estates, Holliswood, Central Queens, Eastern Queens, mostly suburban. The areas in gray show the quarter of a mile from a retail store. You'll see some yellow areas, that's Jamaica Estates and Holliswood. They don't want that. So let me show you how that piece works with the housing piece. This is the zoning, which again is similar to what you have in Staten Island. R12, R2, R2A, these are single family detached zones, right? You're in an R2 zone in a lot of the Westerleigh, you have R2. You also have some R3X, which is two family detached, and then there's some higher density areas as well. So let's take a look at this little area here. This is a classic street in Jamaica Estates. Again, could be on Staten Island, very similar. Big houses, lots of green, trees. I don't see any stores here, right? Well, every one of those boxes shows every location where a corner store could go, or commercial could go. Correct, everywhere. You got it. Exactly. But again, it still doesn't really make sense, right? Why would someone buy a $2 million house or $1 million house, tear it down, and build a 2,500 square foot retail store? That's not what this is about. This is a house in Jamaica Estates. It's a big house on a big piece of property, right? It's more than a quarter acre. It's almost half an acre. It's 17,000 square feet, 3,000 square foot home. In the R12 zone, you can build a one-family home, 60-foot wide property, 5,700 minimum lot size, 5,700 square feet, 0.5 FAR. What is that? Floor area ratio. The size of the building to the size of the lot. If you have a 5,000 square foot property, you can build a 2,500 square foot house with a 0.5 FAR. And you need one parking space. Today, this gentleman or gentlewoman who owns this house can subdivide off the backyard and build a house, just like happens everywhere, right? Another house, same thing, 6,000 square foot property, 3,000 square foot house, one parking space, etc. The baseline for the city of Yes is to eliminate all 1 and 2 family zoning in the city of New York. Because we have to get rid of exclusionary zoning for racial justice purposes and to put a little more housing in every neighborhood. That's the quote. Now, I said the first part because I can tell you that the largest black middle class in the United States, which lives in Southeast Queens, they are not amused by this. We had a meeting a week and a half ago, and 550 people turned out that signed in, and actually yesterday we found out 950 people turned out. And you can see that meeting on my YouTube page anytime you want. This is the baseline right here. The baseline is to shrink the size of the lot, increase the floor area, get rid of your side yards, get rid of your backyard, increase the height, and allow 2 units on each property, plus an accessory dwelling unit. What is an accessory dwelling unit? An accessory dwelling unit is a basement, an attic, an addition onto the back of your home, a garage conversion, or a new house behind your house in your backyard, up to 800 square feet. This is the baseline. The increase in lot coverage would double or more. And you go from, in this case, 2 one-family homes to 9 units, okay? However, in transit zones, which have been mapped throughout the city, Westerleigh is not one of them, thankfully, but in Staten Island, it's the whole East Shore, including Ward Hill and Stapleton and Rosebank and Clifton and all these other areas which have a lot of single and 2-family homes, especially Ward Hill. Well, this transit zone will allow apartment buildings on every property on a wide street. Wide meaning 75 feet wide or wider, according to the city. And corner properties on narrow streets. Because the zoning resolution was a mistake. This gentleman here said how good the zoning resolution was because it separated uses. They want to bring industrial into commercial, commercial into residential, and giant residential into low-density residential. So the transit zone here goes all the way to Tottenville. all the way to Tottenville. It covers more than a quarter of Queens, more than a quarter of Brooklyn, about 20% of the Bronx, and the whole spine of the SIRT, okay? This is called missing middle housing. That would be 3 to 6 story apartment buildings. I've never heard of something called missing middle that was 3 to 6 story apartment. That's high density for me. What about you guys? High density? Right. Okay. So this is the proposal. So this is what happens in a TOD zone. This same property can now be a 33-unit apartment building because they'll allow 100% lot coverage, 80% on interior properties. This is very important. It has to be a large lot. The definition of a large lot, 5,000 square feet. Who lives on a 5,000 square foot lot here? Who lives on a 4,000 square foot lot? That's a typical R2 zone is 4,000, 3,000 square foot lot. 30 by 100. Who lives on 30 by 100? 40 by 100? 50 by 100? 80 by 100? Okay, let me change that. Who lives on 40 by 100 or more? Thank you. My mistake. So what it will take, if you're in one of those zones, is a single property. That 5,000 square foot property will generate 10 units of housing. 10 units. Because they're going to put in this thing called the 500 DUF. DUF stands for Dwelling Unit Factor. It is an imaginary number that excuse me? It's an imaginary number that the city gives to each zone. Well, now they're going to just put that number for all the zones, that number. Because you can divide very easily by it, right? 5,000 divided by 500 is 10. In this case, 16,800 divided by 500 is 33 units. Now, there's no parking required because there will be no parking required for any new residential development in the city of New York, whether it's a one-family home or a 33-unit apartment building. Because, why? Cars are evil. People who drive cars are very evil. I'm laughing with you. That's actually the public reason. That's the useful idiot reason, meaning folks who think we have to get rid of cars to save the world. The real reason is that every parking spot costs developers money. And Mayor Adams has paid back his donors and his friends, who are all developers, with this entire proposal, including eliminating parking, which costs them $67,500 per parking space, according to the city. I use the number 50,000. So if I'm a builder, and I'm building a 40-unit apartment building in a particular zone, and right now I have to put in 20 parking spaces. If I don't have to put in those parking spaces anymore, 20 times 50,000 is $1 million. And the response from city planning at the meetings I've been to has been, oh, they're going to put more housing there. That's to make more units. I said, excuse me. Every developer I know wants to squeeze every penny they can out of a piece of property in the easiest way possible. So if you are now giving them an out, and they can pocket $1 million or save $1 million on a project that they can make a higher profit, they're going to do that. And the response, please hold your questions. The response was, oh, they're not going to do that, from the Department of City Planning. Now, here's where the commercial piece comes in. See that little yellow thing? Well, now I'm a developer, and I say, you know what? I'm building this new building. I'm going to take out a few units. Now I'm going to go to the City Planning Commission and petition to put in a 2,500 square foot retail store for my 28-unit building. There won't be any traffic increase because there's no cars, because there's no parking.
That's why you need the bodega.
That's why you need the bodega, right. So again, it's not a bodega, it's any commercial use of any kind. They call it a bodega to make it sound reasonable, but it's any commercial use of any kind. So my point is, that's how these pieces work together, okay? Similarly, this is another one, campus commercial, okay? Campus commercial, they want to, they're selling it as something that's affecting NYCHA campuses, but it will allow up to 15,000 square feet on any property 1.5 acres or larger in a residential zone. Think Toad Hill, think Grimes Hill, think lots of Staten Island. And all they have to do, Emerson Hill, all they have to do is go to the City Planning Commission and ask to build 15,000 square feet on that property in a residential zone. Okay? So this is Bayside, Queens. I don't know how many people are familiar with Bayside. Okay, a few people. So this is Bell and Northern Boulevard. These are the commercial, this is kind of the center of town. That's the commercial zones, currently. Just to the west of it is a R4 zone, which is like a multifamily zone, relatively low density. You have some of that here. It's a rental complex. Classic garden apartment complex, 3 stories tall, rental units. In the infill provisions, right, they have all these beautiful green spaces, you know, gardens in the garden apartments, right? So currently the site is mostly built out. But what they want to do is they want to increase the baseline development potential, change the height from 33 feet to 45 feet, that immediately adds on a floor. And then, after that, if you're in the transit zone, now you're at a 1.5 FAR, and you're 45 feet. And if you're an infill, you go to 55 feet. So now you're a 5-story building. And now you can put in that 15,000 square feet on the first floor of commercial. That is what we are facing as of right. With the exception of the commercial piece, all of this would be as of right. This is not about having an argument where a developer comes in and says, I want to rezone this from R2 to R4 so I can build 80 units there where there's 4 houses. No, that's not what this is about. This is about as of right. All they have to do is satisfy the requirements, get their permits, and build. Okay? This would be citywide, everywhere. And we are the targets. Our communities are the targets. Westerleigh, I just want to show you this real quick. This was your rezoning from 15 years ago, okay? This is the city's proposal. Just a little bit more housing in every neighborhood. The EIS, the Environmental Impact Statement, says that this entire endeavor will allow for 53,000 to 108,000 units over 15 years across the city. Now, just do the math on this with me. 100,000 units, which is what the mayor is saying. He keeps saying, we need to build 100,000 units in 15 years. Divide that by 59, that's 1,700 units per community board. Divide that by 15 years, it's 120 units per community board per year. We are building way more than 120 units per year, per community board. So what's the real reason behind this? The real reason is to replace owner-occupied homes with market-rate rental housing. There is no affordability in this plan. None. Sir, please hold your questions. Please hold your... Sir, again, sir, I asked everybody to hold their comments and questions till the end. Please, please, please. So basically, one of two things is happening. Either the city is lying about the EIS, the numbers, right? And why are they doing that? Because if they say that it's only going to cost 100,000 units, that means there's no effect on sewers. There's no effect on water. There's no effect on infrastructure. There's no effect on neighborhood character. There's no effect on services. That's why they're saying they're lowballing the numbers. If they're not lowballing the numbers, we don't need this plan at all because we're already doing it. Okay? So again, to remove the 1961 zoning resolution They are going to replace it. They're calling it outdated, just like the governor did. Do you know what they want to go to? The 1916 zoning resolution, the prehistoric zoning resolution. Today, if we never changed the zoning in the city ever again, we could build out the city, if every property were built out, would accommodate 16 to 20 million people today. We have the same people we have. We have 8.2 million people. We had 8 million people in 1960. We went down, we went up, and now we're down again, right? 8.2 million people. We can accommodate today 16 to 20 million people. Do you know what the 1916 plan was, which allowed apartment buildings in low-density zones, industrial uses and residential uses, commercial uses and residential uses, and it's 55 million people. 55 million people. And the analyses that I've done on neighborhoods shows that's exactly what's going to happen if this plan gets approved. 300 to 500% increases in density across the board. So, very quickly, I'm going to show you, these are slides from city planning. Look how nice that looks. You can build that garage into an accessory dwelling unit, or maybe in an attic. These are some of their slides. They say, we have to fix the district zoning. Why do we need to fix it? Because that person, that house wouldn't be allowed today under the current zoning. And we want to allow them to become legal. When Westerleigh was rezoned, they had to meet a basic benchmark. 75-80% of the community had to match the zoning that they wanted. The 20% that didn't, they're legally non-conforming. Their statement is, we have to make everything legal. So they're going to go to the lowest common denominator and allow the most everywhere. So let's show what that looks like in Westerleigh. This is Westerleigh, more or less. I included the other sides of some of the avenues because you have your commercial zones there. So about 40% of Westerleigh is zoned R2, single family. 40% is zoned R3X, which is detached two-family. And then a smaller amount is R31, which is semi-attached 1 and 2 family. And then R32 is multifamily, but those are mostly mapped where your commercial areas are also mapped, okay? So the yellow is 1 family, the orange is 2 family, and the red is multifamily. All of the orange and yellow will become a minimum of 3 units per property. And the city says, well, you don't have to change your single-family home to a 2-family or a 3-family. And my response is, I'm not worried about me, I'm worried about the guy next door, right? So that's the problem. Now, looking at the 1-family zoning, this is a classic street in Westerleigh, right? Currently, this is the current regs. And this is what they're going to do. And I'm not going to go through each detail, but again, 1 family goes to 3 units. Type is detached with an asterisk, because of course if you're in a transit zone, you can build an apartment building. You guys don't happen to be in a transit zone. Your FAR goes up by 50%. Your lot size decreases by 1,000 square feet. Your lot width goes 10 feet narrower. Your lot coverage doubles. Your front yard, well, it stays the same, but it could shrink. Your side yard shrink. Your rear yard goes from 30 feet to 20 feet. And no parking required. Okay, that's the changes they want to make. Similarly with the R3X zone, same kind of thing, right? Same shrinking of the minimums. Same thing with the semi-attached homes, and same thing with the multifamily zones. Now, let's talk about the commercial overlays. What's a commercial overlay? It's an area that allows commercial as of right on top of the residential, meaning you have the underlying residential zoning, and then you have these commercial overlays. Where do you have your commercial overlays? Victory Boulevard, Forest, right? A little bit on Manor, and a few other spots. So, They want to create something called town center zoning. All commercial overlays in the city of New York will be allowed to have 2 to 4 stories of apartments above your commercial. Everywhere. In R1 through R5 zones. So let's take a look at what that looks like. You guys probably recognize this. This is Forest right by Jewett, I believe. Okay? This is, again, this is the kind of thing that could be built. This is just to give you an idea of what could be built here. Okay? And again, I'm not an architect, but that's the basic bulk of what would be allowed. As of right, you have no ability to stop this. Okay? In addition, I keep talking that you're not in the transit zones. However, all religious properties across the city, in every zone outside of the transit zone, will be able to build as if they are in the transit zone. So let's take a look at, I believe it's Sacred Family? Sacred Heart? Yes? I'm sorry? No. This is on Holy Family. Sorry, not Sacred Family. I'm not from Staten Island. Sorry. Holy Family. Okay, so as you can see, Holy Family has a wholly big parking lot. Okay? And this is what can be built as of right under certain circumstances. So this is what we are facing in these proposals. Now, one of the biggest lies that comes up is that we have to get rid of exclusionary zoning. Again, 15% of the city is single-family zoning. 15%. 9% is two-family. So less than 25% of the city is zoned single and two-family. Look at all of these other cities. Almost every other city in the country is between 60 and 80% single-family zoning. Seattle, 81%, everything in purple. Chicago, 79%. Portland, 77%. Los Angeles, 75%. Minneapolis, 70%. Washington, D.C., 36%. New York City, 15%. And where is the single-family zoning? Staten Island and east of the Van Wyck Expressway in Queens, which is where I live. So if you take out east of the Van Wyck Expressway, which has 2/3 of the single-family zoning in the city, there's hardly anything left outside of Staten Island. There's a few blocks in Brooklyn, there's Riverdale, there's a little bit in Country Club in Throgs Neck, a little bit in the Rockaways in Howard Beach, and that's about it. This is Eastern Queens. That's your current single-family zoning. It's about 50% of Eastern Queens. Eastern Queens is about almost the same size as Staten Island, just to let you know. And that's the two-family zoning. So the single and two-family zoning together makes up about 75% of Eastern Queens. This would be the baseline, all three-family. And then these are the transit zones in the one and two-family areas. And then these are the transit zones in the low-density multifamily areas. This is going to happen everywhere across the city. But as I said, Eastern Queens and Staten Island are going to get hit the hardest. By far. By far. We are, well, and again, North and East Bronx, Southern and Central Brooklyn as well. So, basically, this is the environmental review I was talking about. They're not even analyzing what's going to happen. They've created some theoretical models. That's all they've done. They're creating 15 models and they're plugging it into every neighborhood to come up with these bogus numbers. Okay? That's the map that shows you where the development's going to happen. It's going to happen in Staten Island and it's going to happen in Eastern Queens. These are the things that they say are not going to be impacted. Land use, zoning, and public policy, that won't be impacted by this plan. Socioeconomic conditions will not be impacted. Water and sewer infrastructure will not be impacted. Solid waste and sanitation will not be impacted. Energy, greenhouse gases and climate change, air quality, public health, and neighborhood character, none of these will be affected by this plan. So, what's the outcome? And what do we do? These are the 4 outcomes. Outcome number 1, we have 51 people on the city council. We need 26 votes to kill this. 26. So outcome 1 is we get our 26 votes and we kill this. Outcome 2 is the other side gets 26 votes and we accept our fate. Outcome number 3 is we sell our homes. And outcome number 4 is we get Assembly Bill 9417 and a companion Senate bill passed to give our communities the ability to remove themselves from the city of New York. And I will tell you something very serious. This isn't about Staten Island seceding. This is about Westerleigh seceding or South Beach seceding. This is the target that we have created because this is targeted across the state because there's a lot of communities outside of New York City who are also very unhappy with their circumstances because of politicians passing laws and bills that are destroying their communities. So, for example, if you were no longer part of the city of New York, well, that battery bill would no longer exist. As of right development would no longer exist. You would have your own planning board and your own permitting process, just like every other village and town in the entire state of New York. Okay? This bill was written with the express purpose of saying, wake up, New York, because if you don't drop this like a hot potato, we're gonna get this passed and we're gonna take ourselves out of New York City. The experiment is failing 125 years later. So, with that, any questions? Okay, please keep the questions brief, meaning the questions brief, and I'll respond to them. Please, everybody keep down, because it's the acoustics here are really hard to hear.
Okay, the numbers we were talking about were, they wanted, a small number for each board, but if you actually look at the 2 areas, if you convert all these houses, you're saying every single family house would have 3 people.
No, 3 units.
3 units.
Three units. Yes.
Okay, that triples our population.
Exactly.
And that, isn't that gonna just basically, are they doing anything in Manhattan with those lower levels, high-rise, or buildings that could then be, compared to what they're building,
Do you mean changing office buildings into
not just
apartments?
changing office buildings, but the small apartment buildings in Manhattan that exist.
Okay.
There are 3 stories that you can't build, you can't tear them down and build a taller one, 6 stories. Is all of this population growth going to really come to Staten Island and Queens?
I will say this. If you create the ability, it will happen. It will happen. I live in Flushing. Does anybody know about Flushing? I've lived there my entire life. I live on the same block my entire life for almost 53 years. I can tell you very clearly the amount of development that has occurred. I live right near downtown Flushing. Is extraordinary. Why? Because the zoning allows it. Okay? That's what why do you think the development comes to those places? If you create the zoning, it will happen. Now, a lot of arguments that are being said. We need more housing. We need this, we need that. I will say this. We lost 1 million rent-stabilized apartments over the last 25 years in the city of New York. Over 1 million. We have 3 million units in the city altogether. So those all became market rate. They want to, because the government decided to do this, now they want to build it on us. They want to take our communities and build it on us. to have more units. Now again, just because they're building units doesn't mean the rent is going to go down. In fact, it's going to go up. Correct. So again, the magical thinking of this administration, by the way, which is magical thinking across the country. This is happening all over the country, so it's nothing unique in that sense. The uniqueness is we're New York. That's the uniqueness. And we, homeowners, are 1/3 of the population in the city of New York. We are 33% of the properties in New York City, and that includes co-ops and condos. We are the target, the lower density areas. Yes, sir.
What you're talking about was just done in the past 10 years in Bayonne, New Jersey. I go over to Castle, the type of housing they build, main-story buildings that house 40, 50 families in small areas, limited parking. What they said was, you don't need a car. You got the light rail. They came to the city. And they're trying to do the same thing here. All it does is create higher taxes and too much congestion. There'll be no way to be able to shop in the stores if you have to buy food, if you have this amount of people. And listen, it happens on the plate, it happens in Florida.
It's happening, as I said, it's a nationwide thing. It's happening everywhere. Correct. Do you have a question, sir?
Yes, how can we stop?
Okay, so, yes, he has a question. How can we stop it? So that's, I'm sure that's on it. Who else has that question? Hang on. So, as I said, we have a few options here. We need 26 votes on the council to stop this. Okay? Sir, we need 26 votes on the council. Right now, the Assembly and the Senate are running for re-election. That's part of the reason we're pushing this bill. We want co-sponsors because we want our elected officials in the state to make a point to the city electeds and say, hey, if you bozos are going to keep going forward with this, we're going to enable this. And we've already talked to a bunch in Queens who have basically said, if the mayor continues with this, that's exactly what they're going to do. And those are Democrats. We make that very clear. Okay? Some Republicans as well, but Democrats saying this. Okay, well, listen, your borough is different from other boroughs. We know that, but you're not different from our part of Queens. We are much more of a mixed bag where we are. So the fact that elected officials from every ethnic group, from every community, in every part of Queens is pretty unified on this speaks volumes because they all see the threat. So that's what we're doing right now. The council is going to vote on this before the end of the year. They are all running for re-election next year. They all have to be told, if you're going to vote for this, you're out, right? And then we're out. We're gone. So the problem is, there are council members who think this is dandy. They think this is great. There are other elected officials that think this is great. We have an assemblyman in Queens, I'll leave him nameless, who has stated publicly, I believe that all private residential property should be turned over to the state and leased out to people. This is an elected official, okay? My wife grew up under communism in Poland, and she said, they didn't even do that there. Okay, so my point is, we have people who believe from an ideological perspective that this is a good idea. We also have people who are connected to massive real estate who really want this passed for their own purposes, including the mayor. Because remember, this plan wouldn't be moving forward if it wasn't because of the mayor. The mayor, the first week he was in office, created something called the Blast Committee. Do you remember that, sir? The Blast Committee was made up of his donors, the biggest real estate development companies in the city, construction companies, and a lot of his agencies. They came up with a list. The list was called Get Stuff Built. That was the name of the list, and most of that became the City of Yes. This has been his agenda since the day he got into office. His slogan in Brooklyn when he was the borough president was, build, baby, build. So it comes as no surprise. The problem is, if this goes forward, we're done. So this is a do or die situation. Someone asked how many votes do we have? 18. We need 8 more. We really need like 18 more. That's what we need. Hold on, there's this sir here. Sorry, no, I'll get to you. Don't worry. Go ahead, sir.
Hey, how's it going?
All right.
What is actually in 894-17 and the companion Senate bill? Is it just the ability to opt out?
Yes.
What does opting out look like? Is it for the whole zone? Is it for sections? Is it for individuals?
No. Opting out. So the bill as we wrote it, let me explain what the bill is. The bill says, let's say Westerleigh, using the boundaries of the map that we used for Westerleigh. You have, I don't know how many people live here. I'm making it up. 10,000 people? Okay, so you have 10,000 people. You probably have about 4,000 properties altogether, something like that. So you would need to draw a map, write up a draft town charter, which is, they're all over the place, get 20% of the property owners to sign a legal petition, not a change.org petition, but an actual petition that's notarized, a legal document, and submit that to the County Board of Elections before September 1st of any year. If everything is done correctly, then there would be a referendum on the ballot for that November. And only the people who live within those boundaries can vote on whether they want to become their own town. If they vote to become their own town, then they will have a special election. The special election, they will vote for their mayor and their town council. They will then, within 30 days, not be part of New York City anymore. At that point, they will negotiate with the city, or whatever town you're connected to previously, for shared services. What is shared services? You're in the water and sewer services. It's going to be very hard to disconnect. Maybe you want to continue sanitation and have a contract with the city. Maybe you want to do police and fire until you set up your own police and fire. You do that, and if the city refuses to negotiate with you, the courts step in and force them to negotiate with you. That's in the bill. That's what this is. This is not a panacea. It's not a paradise. It's like every other village and town in the state of New York. The difference is, do you want the city to impose this disastrous package on you, or do you want to have self-determination? And that's what this is.
Just a quick follow-up. And you can answer right now, there's a housing crisis, or so they say.
Guys, keep it down because it's hard for me to hear. Sorry.
Right now, they're doing this because of a so-called housing crisis. Meanwhile, we have hundreds, if not thousands of units of rent-controlled spaces sitting empty because landlords can't afford to bring them up to code. What's being done about that? Maybe you can answer that question? Maybe you know?
Sorry, I lost my election last year. I lost my election last year, so I'm not on the city council. I
Okay.
apologize. So what I'm trying to say is, you need to talk to your elected officials about it. You need to talk to your people who work for those offices about that. There is no question that there are tens of thousands of units being kept vacant. There's also no question that there are units in NYCHA that are kept vacant because they're uninhabited, right? Again, building rental, market rate rentals in your community is not going to solve the housing crisis, whatever that might be. And I don't particularly agree that there is a housing crisis today in the city of New York. Other questions? Yes, Ms.
If this still got passed,
Yep.
can they come up to me and say, your piece of property, we want to build something and actually force me?
No. No, of course not. They're going to say that you're not forced to do anything. As I said before, I'm not worried about me. I'm worried about Joe, my neighbor, who's going to take the payout and leave. Right? Other questions? Yes, sir.
This sounds like a great option for us.
A desperate option.
Right, of course, if the votes aren't there,
Correct.
then this. Is there another example of this that has been implemented anywhere else in the country? That's
Yes.
an example, number one. And number two, the developers, they just know money. Quite frankly, the politicians are whores for the money.
You said it, not me.
Okay, I believe it, right here. So I'm just gonna say, why do you think the developers, if we do this, why do you think the developers are gonna pack up and leave? We're not trying to do this with people here who have the power afterwards. Why do you think?
I'm confused by what you're saying, sir.
Why do you think the developers are gonna say, oh, they don't want to play ball, we'll just leave? Won't they try
If you
to-
became Westerleigh, the town of Westerleigh, for example? Is that what you're saying?
Why do
Because if you became the town of Westerleigh, first of all, you can create your own land use laws. There's no more as-of-right development if you don't want it. Every other village and city in the state and town, most of them do not have as-of-right development. People come with their plans. They have to meet the basics. Then they have to get approval from the town planning board. Right now, in the city of New York, any developer files a permit, they get an architect, they pass all the zoning regs, all the building regs, they file their permit, and they start doing what they're doing. Most other places in the state don't do that. And in most other states.
And the other example?
The other example, okay, so yes, recently, look it up, about a large portion of the city of Baton Rouge, Louisiana, seceded about 2 weeks ago. 100,000 people left the city and became their own city. In New York, we have up in Westchester County a long-running situation where an area in the town of Woodspurg, I believe, wants to become their own village, and that is almost happening. That's like this close to happening. So, again, we have a history of hundreds of years in this country of towns splitting, joining, doing what they want to do. We've had this experiment for 125 years based on a certain understanding of local control and equity. You cannot have a city where the stakeholders of the city don't have a buy-in to the government. We have a situation where whatever little power we have over our communities is being taken away from us. And not only taken away, taking us to the Stone Age. It's not even taking us back to where we were 30 years ago. It's like, again, going back to 1916. Yes, sir.
You said earlier the governor is all in favor of these programs, correct?
Yeah, I said the governor is all in favor of these programs, yes.
Once this bill goes through, let's say we get the legislation to pass it, the Assembly and Senate, the governor's not going to sign it.
She can't, she doesn't have to.
She doesn't have to.
No, this is different. No, this doesn't need the governor to sign. This is different. This needs to pass the legislature 2 years in a row. Then it goes to the statewide referendum. After that, then it becomes law if the referendum passes.
So it's like the Constitution.
It's a constitutional amendment, so the governor cannot veto it. Correct. We're leaving the governor out of this. The governor can go do her own thing. Next. Yes.
People who didn't pay rent were evicted. I wouldn't have 2 or 3 empty apartments that I refused to rent anymore. That's number one. That's part of the housing crisis. Number two, something like this. How big can the town be? Would this be all of Staten Island day?
Sure.
Since we've tried to succeed before?
Sure.
We're very close.
There's only a minimum. The minimum is 2,000 people.
Okay.
There's no maximum.
There's no maximum.
No maximum.
We try to get
2,000 people. 2,000 people.
So we can try to get our whole community together and opt out as a.
Well, again, first it has to pass the legislature 2 sessions in a row and then a statewide referendum. Once that
What
happens,
does it take to pass legislation?
it takes a majority vote in the legislature to pass it twice. So we need to get it passed this June and next June.
Through who?
The state legislature, the assembly members and the Senate, not the city. The assembly and the Senate, and then to the statewide referendum where you and I would vote on it, on the back of the ballot. And then it can become law. As I said, listen. Well, as I said, I've got electeds, a Hail Mary, but I've got electeds who have said very clearly, if the city does not back down from this, they are going to forward and vote on this. And these are mainstream Democrats who are very normal people who are, the first question is, you want me to leave the city? You want my district to leave the city? And then when you explain what's happening, they're like, okay, well, I don't believe that the mayor is going to do this, but if he does, and so that's where we're at. Sorry? your assembly members and your senators in Staten Island and across the state. Question?
I'm just curious, how Staten Island, this little section used to be called Prohibition Park.
Yes.
Why can't we go back in time to being Prohibition Park? Wouldn't it predate all of the existing laws?
Yeah, I'm trying to understand what you mean by that.
Like start with a small community, 2,000 people in Prohibition Park.
Again,
most of the houses-
guys, you're jumping the line. You got to get through 2 sessions of the legislature and a statewide referendum. Then you could do 2,000 people or 10,000 people or 100,000.
So can you give us the names to call? Can you give us some guidance?
I think the Civic will be list in the back. Anybody else? Folks who are leaving, if you can keep it down.
Let's not lose focus. If you want to do this or you don't want to do this, it's going to take 3 to 4 years.
Correct.
For it to become legal.
Correct.
Then it's going to take a number of years to negotiate. Negotiations will not be easy. Right? So let's say 6 to 7 years between everything. In the meantime, the law passes and those affordable housing goes into effect, and then have 7 years to work on this and change everything.
Correct.
Right? The focus should be on going to the city council and getting those folks in house. If you want to do this, I don't want to do it necessarily, but that's another discussion.
As I said, sir.
Go to the council now.
Sir.
And get what you can do.
Sir.
If you want to do this, do that.
It's number 4 on the list.
Yes, but that's all we're talking about. And everybody's cheering and rallying. It's almost like a discussion to do only this.
Hold on, sir.
You don't just do number 1 first. You do number
That's-
1 and
that's-
you do number 4 at the same
Okay,
time.
folks.
If you don't do number 4 at the same time you're doing number 1, you're not going to get the 28 votes for
Correct.
number 1. But if,
Correct.
if they know they're going to, if you work on everybody now,
Correct.
vote on it, they pass it.
That's-
this year before it goes into effect, you'll get the 28.
Correct. What the gentleman said very clearly was you have to focus on number 4 to get number 1. And that's exactly correct. Thank you, everybody.